Some choices feel heavier than they should, not because they are complicated, but because something inside you already knows the answer before your mind has time to form a question. Right now, you are standing at one of those moments. In front of you are 5 ancient swords. They are not ordinary weapons. Each one has been carried by a different kind of soul across a different kind of journey. Each one holds a different weight, a different light, a different silence. Before you begin comparing their shapes or colors, before your mind starts building explanations, pause. Take a breath. Let your eyes rest on them. Notice which sword quietly pulls your attention without asking for it. That pull is not random. That pull is information. It is a language of the unconscious, and it is already speaking to you. Do not think yet. The moment you begin to analyze, you step away from the very thing this test is designed to reach. What you are about to discover may already be shaping how you lead, how you protect, how you seek, and how you transform, whether you are aware of it or not. The sword you choose will not define you, but it will reveal something about where you are right now, something about which inner force is most alive inside you at this moment in your life. Stay with me until the end. What follows is not a prediction. It is a mirror. Carl Jung spent his entire life studying one profound question. Why do certain symbols speak to every human being, across every culture, across every century, as if they were written into our very nature? His answer was the theory of archetypes. Jung believed that deep within the human psyche there exists a layer he called a collective unconscious. This is not the personal unconscious, the private world of your individual memories and wounds. This is something older, something shared. A vast reservoir of images, patterns, and forces that every human being carries simply by being human. He called the figures that live in this deeper layer archetypes. Universal characters that appear in our dreams, in myths and fairy tales, in religions, in the stories every civilization has ever told. The hero, the wise elder, the shadow, the king, the magician. These are not invented personalities. They are forces, living energies that shape how we think, how we love, how we fight, and how we grow. And symbols, Jung said, are the language through which these archetypes communicate. When a symbol reaches you on a level that bypasses explanation, when something draws you without reason, when you feel recognition before you feel understanding, that is your unconscious responding to an archetype that already lives within you. Now consider the sword. Throughout human history, across nearly every civilization ever known, the sword has been one of the most sacred and psychologically loaded symbols in existence. In ancient Japan, the sword was not merely a weapon. It was the soul of the warrior, a spiritual object believed to carry the spirit of its bearer. Samurai did not simply wield swords. They became them. In medieval Europe, the sword was a symbol of divine justice. Knights swore oaths over blades. Kings were crowned with them. The famous sword of Excalibur was not just a weapon of war. It was a mark of rightful rule, of inner worthiness made visible. In Hindu philosophy, the goddess Durga carries a sword not to destroy, but to sever illusion, to cut through what is false and reveal what is true. In Norse mythology, legendary swords were given names, treated as living companions, and believed to choose their wielders. Why has the sword held this sacred weight across so many different worlds and times? Because the sword represents something the human psyche recognizes instantly, even before thought. It represents the act of choosing, of cutting, of separating what must be left behind from what must be carried forward. The sword is the symbol of the boundary between who you were and who you are becoming. Jung wrote that the warrior is one of the most fundamental archetypes of the human psyche. It is not simply the one who fights. It is the one who acts with courage in the face of fear, the one who protects what is worth protecting, the one who moves forward even when the path is uncertain. And within the warrior, there are many faces. The king warrior, who leads with honor, the hero, who charges into the unknown, the sage, who seeks truth before action, the magician, who transforms rather than destroys, and the shadow warrior, who must first conquer the battles within before facing anything outside. Each of these is a different expression of the same primal force, and each sword waiting before you carries a different one of these energies. Jung also spoke of what he called the hero's journey. This is a universal story that appears in every mythology, every great literature, and in every human life. It begins with an ordinary world. Then comes a call to something greater. There is resistance, a threshold, a descent into difficulty. And then, slowly through trial and encounter with one's own shadow, comes transformation, integration, the return as someone wiser, stronger, and more whole. The sword you choose today is a symbol of where you currently stand in that journey. Not where you began, not where you will end, but where you are right now. Which force within you is most awake, most active, most in need of being seen and understood. Before we go further, I want to be clear about how this works, because how you approach this moment matters. Do not think about which sword is most beautiful or most impressive. Do not try to choose the one that sounds like the best personality. Do not reason your way toward an answer. This test works precisely because it bypasses that kind of thinking. Your unconscious mind moves faster than logic. It processes images, symbols, and emotional weight in fractions of a second, long before your rational mind has assembled its opinion. That first instinctive pull towards something, that is not randomness. That is recognition. Look at the 5 swords. Let your eyes move across them naturally, and notice which one creates even the slightest response in you. Familiarity, tension, quiet comfort, a sense of being seen. Even mild discomfort can be meaningful, because sometimes we are drawn not to what feels safe, but to what feels necessary. Trust your first instinct. Do not second-guess it. The moment you begin to analyze, you have stepped away from the part of you this test is designed to reach. Hold your choice in mind. Remember it clearly, because now we begin. Take a moment. Look at all 5 swords. The lion sword, the dragon sword, the crystal sword, the flame sword, the shadow sword. Which one pulls you in? Choose now, before we go any further. If the lion sword is the one that called to you, there is something unmistakable in how you move through the world. You do not simply exist in spaces. You hold them. The lion has carried the same symbolic weight across centuries and cultures. In ancient Egypt, the lion was a guardian of sacred thresholds. In heraldry across the kingdoms of Europe, it stood for sovereignty, nobility, and the kind of courage that does not tremble. And in the Jungian framework, the lion warrior represents the king archetype, the one who leads not through force alone, but through a sense of inner authority that others instinctively recognize and trust. People drawn to the lion's sword tend to carry responsibility naturally, not because it was handed to them, but because something inside them steps forward when it is needed. You may not always seek leadership, but leadership has a way of finding you anyway. Others look to you in moments of uncertainty, not necessarily because you have all the answers, but because your presence communicates stability. You create a kind of psychological safety simply by showing up. There's honor in how you operate. You likely hold yourself to a standard that you rarely announce but never fully compromise. The way you treat people when nothing is at stake tells you more about yourself than any test ever could. And deep down, that consistency matters to you. You understand the weight of a promise. You understand what it means to give your word and to carry it. From a Jungian perspective, the king archetype represents order, responsibility, and the capacity to hold something larger than yourself. But Jung was also careful to note that the king without self-awareness becomes a tyrant, not through cruelty necessarily, but through the quiet, creeping belief that control equals strength, that if you can manage every outcome, you are safe. That if you hold everything together tightly enough, nothing will fall apart. This is the shadow of the lion's sword. You may find it difficult to ask for help, not because you are too proud, but because somewhere inside, needing help feels like failing those who depend on you. You may carry more than your share, not always by choice, but because you trust yourself to carry it more than you trust others. There may be moments when your sense of responsibility becomes a kind of inner prison, when you forget that even the most sovereign soul needs to be vulnerable sometimes. When you mistake emotional control for emotional health. The lion's sword teaches that true leadership is not about having no weakness. It is about having the courage to acknowledge it. If the sword chose you, ask yourself honestly, where in your life are you holding everything together for everyone else while quietly falling apart within yourself? Where have you confused control with safety? And who, in your life, are you truly allowing to see you, not the version of you that leads and holds and carries, but the version that is simply and honestly human? Your psyche is not asking you to stop being a protector. It is asking you to remember that the most powerful thing you can model for others is not strength alone. It is the integrity to know your own limits. The lion does not roar to intimidate. It roars because it knows exactly what it is. If the dragon's sword is the one that captured your attention, something inside you does not flinch when the path becomes uncertain. You move. You act. You do not wait for perfect conditions because you understand, perhaps better than most, that perfect conditions never truly arrive. The dragon is one of the most complex and cross-cultural symbols in human history. In the mythology of the East, the dragon is a sacred creature of power, wisdom, and protection. In the mythological traditions of the West, the dragon is the great obstacle, the final test, the thing that stands between the ordinary life and the extraordinary one. And in both traditions, it is the same symbol doing the same work. It marks the threshold of transformation. In Jungian psychology, the hero archetype is not simply the one who wins. It is the one who faces, the one who moves into difficulty rather than away from it, the one who is willing to risk failure, exposure, and even defeat in pursuit of something worth fighting for. People drawn to the dragon's sword tend to have a relationship with challenge that others find difficult to understand. Where many see risk as something to be avoided, you often feel most alive when something real is at stake. You trust your own ability to adapt. You have likely been through experiences that should have broken you and didn't, and that track record lives inside you now as a quiet form of confidence that you rarely need to announce. You do not need to wait for permission. You decide and then you move. But the dragon's sword also carries a shadow that is important to understand. The hero archetype, when it operates unconsciously, can turn every situation into a battle. Every problem becomes a conflict to be conquered. Every relationship becomes a challenge to be managed. Every stillness begins to feel like stagnation. And when the need for action is not matched by the wisdom to pause, decisions are made for momentum rather than clarity. You may have a tendency toward impatience, not because you are reckless, but because you process threat and opportunity quickly and feel the urgency of response in your body before your mind has time to slow it down. This is a tremendous gift in moments of genuine crisis, but it can become costly in moments that require patience, reflection, or the quiet courage of simply waiting. There is also this: not every problem wants to be fought. Some of the most significant battles of a hero's journey happen not on an external field, but inside, in the confrontation with your own fear, in the willingness to sit with uncertainty without reaching immediately for action, in learning the difference between the kind of strength that strikes and the kind that simply endures. If the dragon sword called to you, ask yourself, what are you currently charging toward and what are you charging away from? Is the movement in your life driven by vision or by the discomfort of staying still? Where in your life are you using action as a way of not feeling something you need to feel? The hero's journey is not a single battle. It is a cycle of challenge, descent, and transformation that happens again and again at deeper and deeper levels throughout an entire life. You are not here to fight everything. You are here to face what matters. And sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is put the sword down, breathe, and let the truth of the moment arrive on its own terms. If the crystal sword drew your gaze and held it, you are someone whose relationship with truth is not casual. It is a way of existing. Crystal is transparent. It does not hide what passes through it. It does not distort the light. It simply reveals. And that quality, the desire for clarity, for honesty, for understanding that goes beneath the surface, is something you carry as a core part of how you move through the world. In Jungian terms, the sage archetype is a seeker of wisdom, not the accumulator of facts, but the one who wants to understand why people behave as they do, why patterns repeat, why certain fears persist long after their original cause has disappeared. You are not satisfied with surfaces. You want to see the structure beneath them. People drawn to the crystal sword often have a quality of unusual inner stillness. You observe before you act. You listen with more of yourself than just your ears. You notice the gap between what someone says and what they mean, between the public face and the private experience. This makes you perceptive in ways that can feel uncomfortable to those who are not accustomed to being truly seen. You likely think a great deal. Ideas are not abstract for you. They are alive. You return to questions that others let go of. You find yourself drawn to understanding the deeper mechanisms of things, human behavior, psychological patterns, the invisible forces that shape decisions and relationships and lives. There's a quality of discipline in you, not the rigid kind, but the kind that comes from genuine respect for your own mind. You do not waste it on what is trivial. You trust careful thought in the way that others trust their instincts. But the crystal sword has its shadow, and it is important. Clarity, pursued without balance, can become a kind of coldness. The sage who lives too entirely in the mind can begin to mistake understanding for connection. You may sometimes find that while you can analyze an emotion with great precision, actually feeling it, actually sitting inside it without immediately stepping back to observe it, is more difficult than it should be. There is also the shadow of overthinking. The crystal sword reflects light with perfect accuracy, but when turned too intensely inward, it can blind rather than illuminate. The pursuit of complete understanding before any action can become a quiet form of avoidance, a way of remaining safely in thought while life waits for you to participate in it. You may hold yourself to a standard of clarity that no living experience can actually meet. You may distrust your own emotions precisely because they are not logical. And in doing so, you may be unknowingly cutting yourself off from a kind of wisdom that is not rational but is entirely real. If the crystal sword called to you, ask yourself, where in your life are you using understanding as a substitute for feeling? Where has your need for clarity caused you to stay in your head when someone or something needed your heart? And is there a truth about yourself that you have been analyzing from a careful distance rather than actually living? The sage does not find wisdom by remaining apart from life. True wisdom is earned by entering fully, by allowing things to matter, by accepting that some of the most important truths cannot be perfectly understood. They can only be experienced. Your mind is extraordinary, but the crystal sword is sharpest not when it separates you from the world, but when it helps you see it more clearly while you are fully inside it. If the flame sword is the one that spoke to you, something inside you already knows that life is not meant to remain as it is. Transformation is not a chapter in your story. It is the entire current running beneath it. Fire has been the most sacred symbol across human civilization, precisely because of what it does. It does not merely destroy. It transforms. It takes what existed in one form and releases it into something entirely different. In alchemy, the ancient predecessor of modern chemistry and psychology, fire was the essential element of transmutation, the force that turned base metal into gold. And Jung saw in alchemy a profound metaphor for the psychological work of individuation, the long, often painful, often beautiful process of becoming more fully and authentically who you truly are. The magician archetype in Jung's framework is not a performer or a trickster. The magician is the transformer, the one who understands that reality is not fixed, that the self is not fixed, that even the most entrenched patterns and wounds and limitations can be transmuted into something new. The magician does not accept that what was will always be. People drawn to the flame sword tend to have a particular relationship with beginnings, new chapters, new ideas, new versions of themselves. These are not frightening to you. They are alive. You may have remade yourself more than once, not because you were lost, but because you understood that growth requires the willingness to release what no longer serves you, even when it is familiar, even when it is comfortable, even when other people expect you to remain where you are. There is something almost visionary in how you approach life. You can feel potential in a situation before it has taken form. You sense the possibility beneath the surface of what exists, and you feel genuinely moved by the gap between what is and what could be. This gives you a creative energy that others can feel simply by being near you. You carry the quality of a spark. But the flame sword reveals a shadow that deserves honest attention. Fire, without a container, burns through everything indiscriminately. The magician who is not grounded can mistake constant change for growth, who can use the promise of transformation as a way of escaping the discomfort of staying with something long enough to truly change it, who creates new beginnings because they are easier than doing the slow, difficult work that middles require. You may have unrealistic expectations, not of others necessarily, but of transformation itself. The belief that change should feel like liberation, immediately and completely. And when the reality of change, which is often uncomfortable, nonlinear, and unglamorous, does not match that expectation, the impulse to begin again can arise before the current chapter has finished its work. There is also the shadow of detachment. Someone who lives at the leading edge of transformation can sometimes lose their roots, can feel disconnected from ordinary life, from the steady rhythms of everyday existence that are not extraordinary but are essential. If the flame sword called to you, ask yourself honestly, are you transforming or are you escaping? Is the change you seek in your life moving you towards something real and chosen, or moving you away from something uncomfortable and unresolved? And what would happen if you stayed with your current reality long enough to let it truly complete itself before you struck the match again? The magician's deepest power is not in creating endless change. It is in the courage to transform what is within, not just what is around you, to turn the flame inward, gently and honestly, and allow it to burn away what is false, so that what is real can finally breathe. You are not here to simply begin things. You are here to complete the most essential transformation of all, becoming steadily and fully who you actually are. If the shadow sword is the one that caught your attention, something in you is already living closer to the truth than most people allow themselves to be. This is the sword that others often overlook. Its darkness makes some people look away instinctively, but you did not look away. And that alone says something important about where you are in your inner life. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, is one of the most misunderstood and most important concepts in all of depth psychology. Jung used the term shadow to describe the parts of ourselves that have been rejected, suppressed, or pushed into the unconscious because at some point they were deemed unacceptable, too intense, too vulnerable, too angry, too ambitious, too sensitive, too different. These are not evil parts. They are simply parts that the world around us, our families, our cultures, our early experiences, did not know how to receive. And so, over time, we learn to hide them, to perform an acceptable version of ourselves while the truer, more complex version waited in the dark. Choosing the shadow sword suggests that something in you is no longer willing to perform. People drawn to the sword often have a quality of unusual depth. You have likely been through experiences that required you to develop an inner life, because the outer world did not always offer what you needed. You know what it is to carry something that doesn't have words. You understand complexity, not as an abstract idea, but as lived experience. You may feel, and perhaps have always felt, that there's more of you than most people ever get to see. Not because you are hiding it deliberately, but because you learned early that revealing it fully was not always safe. And so you adapted. You became selective. You built quiet walls around certain rooms of yourself. But those rooms did not disappear. They simply waited. Jung wrote that what we refuse to acknowledge does not go away. It goes underground. And from there, it shapes us more powerfully than anything we consciously choose. It appears in our overreactions, in our recurring conflicts, in the patterns of our relationships that seem to repeat themselves in ways we cannot fully explain, in the sudden, unexpected feelings that arise from nowhere and overwhelm us without warning. The shadow sword is the invitation to stop running from these rooms, to walk toward them, to open the doors and discover that what is inside is not what you feared. It is potential. It is power. It is the parts of you that were never broken, only buried. This is not easy work. It is perhaps the most demanding inner work a person can undertake, because it requires the willingness to see yourself not as you wish you were, but as you actually are. All of it, the capability and the wound, the strength and the fear, the parts you are proud of, and the parts you have spent years trying to keep invisible. But here is what Jung also understood. The shadow, when integrated consciously, becomes a source of extraordinary energy. The anger you were told to suppress contains passion and the capacity to protect what matters. The sensitivity you were told was weakness contains empathy and the ability to connect at a depth most people never reach. The ambition you were taught to hide contains a genuine sense of purpose that, when honored, can move you in directions you cannot yet fully imagine. If the shadow sword called to you, ask yourself, what parts of yourself are you still performing around? What feelings do you push back down before they have a chance to be understood? What would you allow yourself to be if no one was watching and no approval was required? Your psyche is not asking you to destroy anything. It is asking you to reclaim what was always yours. The shadow sword does not cut through others. It cuts through the self-deception that has kept you smaller than you are. And in doing so, it opens the most important door you will ever walk through, the door to wholeness. You are not here to be a tidy, acceptable version of yourself. You are here to be true, all of you, even the parts that are still finding their way into the light. Your choice of sword was not a label. It was a signal. Each sword represents a different archetype, a different dominant force currently shaping how you think, how you act, and how you experience yourself in the world. But no human being is made of only one of these forces. The king warrior lives in you. So does the hero. So does the sage, the magician, and the shadow. They are not separate personalities. They are different chambers of the same inner life. What this test revealed is not who you are in total. It revealed which archetype is currently most active, which inner voice is speaking loudest right now, which energy is asking to be understood, honored, and integrated into the larger whole of who you are becoming. Carl Jung believed that the goal of psychological life is not to eliminate our inner conflicts, but to hold them consciously, to develop a relationship with every part of ourselves, including the ones we find difficult or confusing, and to allow them to inform rather than control us. He called this process individuation, the gradual, lifelong unfolding of the authentic self beneath the roles, the expectations, the fears, and the masks that life places upon us. Individuation is not a destination. You do not arrive at it. You move toward it continually, with increasing honesty and increasing courage, one choice, one awareness, one moment of genuine self-recognition at a time. This is why your choice today mattered, not because it predicts your future, but because it reflects your present, because it names something that was already moving inside you, shaping your decisions and your relationships and your quiet inner dialogue, long before you sat down to watch this video. Notice, as you move forward, which archetype is asking for more of your attention. The king warrior will ask you where you are carrying too much alone. The hero will ask whether you are moving towards something real or away from something unresolved. The sage will ask where you are thinking instead of feeling. The magician will ask whether your changes are growth or escape. And the shadow will always ask the most important question of all, what are you still afraid to be? These are not questions to answer once and put away. They are questions to live with, to return to let evolve as you evolve, because the sword you chose is not fixed. In another season of your life, another sword may speak to you more clearly. That is not inconsistency. That is growth. The psyche is alive. It moves. It changes. It deepens. And more honestly you listen to it, the more clearly it will show you the way forward. If this reflection resonated with you, share in the comments which sword you chose and which part of the interpretation felt most true. Your honesty may give someone else permission to recognize something they have been carrying quietly on their own. And if you want to continue exploring the inner life through the lens of Jungian psychology, subscribe to this channel. There is more to discover, more layers to understand, more of yourself waiting to be known. Remember, you are not only the archetype you chose today. You are the entirety of every archetype, slowly learning to carry them all with awareness, with courage, and with the kind of quiet respect that genuine self-knowledge makes possible. The sword does not choose the warrior. The warrior chooses to pick it up. And in that choice, everything begins.